Now back to the show. This is The Law Show on CL 650.
That's a good karaoke song, you know. It's so easy to remember. We're talking about immigration and citizenship law with Gordon Maynard and Alex Stojcevic from MKS Law in downtown Vancouver. You specialize in this. Now, headline news, in the summer, all of the refugees leaving Syria and North Africa and the Middle East going to Greece through Europe, and there was front page stories about them wanting to come to North America. The Liberal government said we're going to do 25,000 before the end of the year. That didn't quite happen. There's a story of 700 refugees staying at the Sandman Hotel in downtown Vancouver getting $10 a day to eat. I mean, that isn't going to end well in some ways for these people who've come here and they can't support themselves. But that must put strain on the federal system to get people into the country. You can't just grow the bureaucracy overnight. So are you finding that the resources being put towards the Syrian refugee crisis is taking eyeballs away from the family matter of getting people into the country?
In part.
Yeah.
There's not a direct relation there.
Okay, so how does it work?
Well, one is they did have to send a good number of officers overseas,
right,
and internally devote resources as well to the process, the community discussions, the paperwork that needs to be done. So bodies needed to be put there, and bodies are in short supply.
Mm-hmm.
So
and,
yeah,
I mean, to give you an example, there is a centralized unit that was started under the Conservatives in Winnipeg to deal with a specific type of criminal rehabilitation application. It had 5 full-time staff that was supposed to deal with this type of application for the whole country. All 5 of those staff have been sent to work on refugees, which means the work that they're supposed to be doing isn't being done by anyone.
So today we're talking about families and bringing families together, but I'm sure you deal with all of these other matters
Absolutely.
when
Yes.
it comes to people
Yeah,
inside the country. So you are getting an impact in stick handling through the government process.
And the other impact that's directly related to families is that the refugee processing system that's in place is right now not really doing any other refugees other than Syria. Right. And so if you have a group of 5 sponsors and you're trying to bring a church group, which our partner Rudy's involved in one that is trying to bring two families from Iraq, for example, their applications are largely being stalled because these other resources are being devoted to Syria.
Mm-hmm. And then you also have to keep in mind that the calling the immigrant group that you're dealing with refugees are a whole different kettle of fish than the other bodies of immigrants that come into Canada.
But there's only so many people. There's only so many people in the government to deal with them. That's what I'm getting
true.
at.
Yeah, there's that. But the government had dedicated staff to begin with on the refugee side. They had
Right.
to take extra bodies to meet the overload caused by the deadline that they imposed upon themselves, the processing that needed to be done. But once you bring those refugees into Canada, then you're putting stress on the social services and on the provincial governments and all the other resources that you're looking at to provide support to these people inside Canada. That is not so much a federal responsibility anymore. It's a local government responsibility. And that doesn't really impact on the other body of refugees, whether they're parents or economic immigrants. They're 2 different sets of resources there. But what we're seeing now, that story in the paper about the refugees being put up in hotels and whatnot, you're seeing a lag time in provision of those social services that are needed for them.
In fairness to my colleague, what I would add, though, to that is that the system for refugees was non-existent. Okay, under the previous government, regularly, and in the last 2 years, $130 million of their resourced budget in their budget towards refugees was annually returned to Treasury. So that was money that was not being spent. It was budgeted,
but not spent.
But they weren't spending it, and so there were no officers dedicated to refugees.
And that wasn't just this. This was many departments in the government.
Many departments
were shipping money back to help bolster the books. Right?
10%.
Exactly. So what the new government has had to do is live up to this commitment, whereas at the same time largely recreate a refugee processing system at a time when some of the people that they could have relied on have retired, have moved on to different parts of the government, and that is one of the tensions within the promises versus the reality of processing.
I just wanted to get a snapshot of how that impacts. Because that's front page, that's top of the news, and we're seeing a lot about it. But just wanted to know how it impacts everything.
I can feel these people's pain. Okay, $10 in Sandman.
No.
I had a flight at Heathrow
Excuse me.
that was canceled, and their meal voucher was £4. So
Wow.
Heathrow Airport on £4. I think I'd not much different than $10.
That's when you take them as
Vancouver.
guests into the Maple Leaf Lounge with you. And
That's
say,
right. That's
have
right.
at it. So we were talking earlier about the 5,000 number that's now been bumped to 10 under the new Liberal government of families' applications that are coming into the country. So you're saying the applications are basically, they took 14,000 of them in a day, or a day and a half.
Mm-hmm.
Is there another window to get into the country? Is there a provincial avenue that you can go through? Is there I have lots of money, I can get in? Like, we used to talk about the entrepreneur class where people who had plenty of money could jump the queue and get to the front. Is that all gone now?
Yeah.
So,
there are very limited.
I didn't want that short an answer.
There are the provincial investor programs
Right.
are limited.
Okay.
The provinces only have so many slots.
Mhm.
And the federal programs have been so impaired by lack of resources, by design problems, by functionality, that they have driven people to the provincial programs, wherever they can fit.
Mhm.
And the provincial programs have become overloaded. And so right now, virtually across Canada, programs are topped out. They're not accessible anymore. The provinces are closing down. They're redesigning them to try and get down to numbers that they can manage. I have never seen in 30 years a system that has been so profoundly impaired at so many different levels across the board over the course of the last 4 or 5 years.
If you could hit the reset button today, how would it look for this class of immigrants?
Well, for this class of immigrants, I would certainly have decided in terms of processing not to devote the first type of innovation in terms of online processing to go to economic class. I would have devoted it to this because it's infinitely more fair. I know that some people have compared online processing in categories like this to a battle between who's going to have access to the best technology. But the reality is having an online application system at least eliminates this bias towards wherever the processing center will be. And, living in Vancouver, it seems like an Eastern bias towards people in Toronto. But the way the system is set up, this happens anytime they open a processing center. I'll give you an example. Last time we did allow investor applications under the old system was 2011. The system opened for 1 day, July of 2011, in Sydney, Nova Scotia. And it closed in a day because they got 1,000 applications, all from mainland China, from about 6 consultants who chartered planes from China to Sydney, Nova Scotia. I can only imagine how difficult that was, and filled the quota in about, a couple of hours.
And the reality is they're not wanting to move to Nova Scotia.
They don't want to move to Nova Scotia. No. It's just that the processing center has been stuck there. We have another one in Vegreville, which is also a well-known Canadian processing center in Alberta. I mean, having processing centers that are only accessible in this manner, and I mean, under the previous government, they eliminated every other manner to contact immigration. You can't phone people. You can't show up in an office and ask a question. They've left themselves open to this. So what I would have done if I hit reset is started in these categories where it's inherently more fair to have an opportunity where everybody can apply at the same time, rather than leave these relatively straightforward applications to be processed in an electronic manner, rather than devoting all that electronic technological innovation on categories that are more complicated.
I'm going to take an issue here. I'm sorry. I think that the problems with the system right now, if I could hit the reset button, are so much more profound. They're not going to be answered by simply saying, let's move to online applications in this category or that category. There is a complete diminishment of a level of services in the government at all levels, at every related level, whether it's work permit applications, PR applications, LMIA applications. Government services are greatly diminished. It's hard for anybody to get good information. The rules keep changing. There's bad planning. There's bad processing. There's a lack of coordination to the program, and all the birds are coming home to roost now in 2016. We're seeing it in so many different directions.
Was this just a Tory problem, or did this start under the Chrétien era?
Well, every government is capable of screwing things up.
Yeah, well,
but,
we know that.
But
That's
this
a given.
current problem is directly the result of major changes in policy and implementation that have been put in place under the Conservatives government in the past 5 years, particularly.
I mean, Jason Kenney, when he was Minister of Citizenship and Immigration, eliminated the category you mentioned earlier, entrepreneur and investor, and instead touted a new program that was going to replace it called the Startup Visa Program. And he took aside a unit of 25 officers and devoted them to this new startup visa category. Do you know how many people those 25 processed in year one?
No.
2.
How was that possible?
And in year 2, they did 5.
Stupid program.
The program is overly onerous. It throws at private industry the onus on recommending someone based on their own investment in their idea versus this people's capital and what they've done themselves. And it's taken to this point before you actually have a churn or a volume of applications. And meanwhile, those people could have worked on almost anything else. They could have answered phones, but instead they read the paper in an office in Ottawa because this was the pet project of the then minister.
There was a good photo op opportunity that came up.
Well, that's what I was going to get to. Is this just a race to balance the budget for the election year? Did you hear that from inside the government? Did anybody speak to you off the record and say, listen, that we're just carving services to
That's
hit that
part
number?
of it. That's not the whole answer.
No.
That's not the whole answer.
Let's be honest though. You have 3 things here that we're working, and this has been a topic of our shows regularly. First, the Conservatives were very much interested in policy innovation that had to do with technology that would result in cost cutting. But they were impatient to have the cost cutting come down the road from the technology. They would roll out the technology and fire everybody right afterwards.
Right. Then put a Band-Aid on it.
Exactly. So that was problem 1. Problem 2 was a fundamental mistrust of their own civil servants. Ottawa can't do things well, so we're going to look outside of Ottawa to manage things. We're going to dump it on the provinces. We're going to outsource technology to third parties. The people we can't trust are civil servants. And the third thing that the third pillar here was rule of law. When organizations like the Canadian Bar Association or their own Department of Justice told them, no, look, you can't do that. People have rights. You can't just change things midstream. They would either ignore that advice, okay, or change the law so that it would suit their own agenda.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. This is The Law Show on CL 650. Today we are talking about immigration law and what you need to do to stick handle maybe getting a family member into the country. We're speaking with MKS Law in downtown Vancouver. We'll pick it up when we come back next on CL 650.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.